Hi, Trey. Can you hear
Hello.
me? Can you hear me?
Wait,
Can't hear me
are
yet?
you there?
Yes.
Ah, okay, now.
Okay.
Uh, you didn't get to
Fantastic.
you didn't get to hear the sound of me pissing.
Yeah, too bad, man.
Hello.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Cheers. Good. Hey, so this is already our fifth meeting.
Yeah, I know. I was kind of surprised how when I started up Tony's talk with you the other day, I was like, oh shit, an hour 45. I don't know if I can do it. And I totally did it. I had to do it in two sessions, but I just put it on and it was I don't know. It didn't feel like you were turning over an hour and 45 of your time.
Yeah, I agree. Like also I find that like some conversations really need like an hour for me and the guest to warm up. It's kind of interesting that really it's maybe like the last 30 minutes which are usually the best.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting experiment, like I keep saying that I really don't know what I'm doing here in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
Just and I just said to my partner, like I keep doing this just to see what may happen.
Right, 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 right. Well, it's I haven't really thought about it too much, but it's you do a great job, and it's a lot like coaching. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not you don't come in with any. I mean, maybe you have some general ideas, but I bet you abandon them pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I don't. I try to not have any ideas, really. Yeah. I mean, I know that like we stopped like 2 weeks ago, we stopped at a certain point talking about well, actually it was 3 weeks ago. Um, and maybe we pick up there, but like this kind of like little question that comes to my mind right now is, do you think that so far we have skipped something that's very important in your life?
Um, well, we haven't skipped something, but we're on our way to something. And I'm curious. I'm curious what will happen when we talk about it because it's kind of a sore spot as well for me.
Yeah. Yeah. What is that?
That's the Quodia project.
It is the sore spot for you?
Yeah, yeah. But
Interesting.
do we do that now, or do you want to go through
No, we
molybdenum?
can. Yeah, exactly. The joy of molybdenum. That's
Yeah.
sort of like, kind of like, I would say your most mysterious album in a way.
Why is that?
I mean, just the name, right?
Oh yeah,
Even,
yeah, yeah.
right? So,
Well, I lived down the road from a molybdenum mine when I was in New Mexico.
okay.
And so it kind of had that it's kind of a weird thing. It's kind of a weird substance. I've never even heard. I mean, it's one of the elements, and
Mhm.
who's heard of it? It's in our vitamins, and it conducts electricity. And yeah, somehow, I don't know, you grab stuff and it sticks. So that stuff. Yeah. And I've been, that one's pretty fresh because I've been, well, that one and maybe we talk a little bit about repercussions. They're really fresh because I've just finished. Well, you can see all the tapes. I've
Mhm.
got them laid out now. I
Mhm.
just finished the last of the uh, copying all the molybdenum tapes. Bob actually, we recorded it on 24 track on analog. That's probably the last thing I ever did on that, like real analog tape.
Mhm.
As
Mhm.
far as I think of, and Bob, the percussionist, partner with me pretty much through the whole Trey Gunn band process and earlier. Tabla player, drummer, great guy, and also engineer. He built a studio in New York got an old Neve desk, 32 channel Neve desk, and put flying faders in it. And that's where we recorded it, in his studio. So he had just recently transferred all those. He's moving and wanted to get rid of all this freaking analog tapes. I mean, they're huge and heavy, and you only get 15 minutes on one reel of tape. So he had them digitized, and I just kind of have been going through the process of looking to see what's there and organizing it, and then all of my ADAT tapes, because we worked a little bit. I was already living in Seattle. I wasn't living in New York anymore. So I would go to New York and we record a bit and then, dump bits of it onto ADAT, and I would come home and work and we'd bring it back. And so I have all that, which is, it's marginally interesting. I mean, for me, it's marginally interesting. The interesting part is I have all the freaking rehearsal tapes and the writing tapes. And, what do you do with that? So I was like, well, I started this process. I just have to keep copying them. So I have just an insane amount of rehearsal tapes and writing tapes, and even running DATs. For some reason, I totally forgotten that we were, even before the recording began, like maybe we had been on the road and Fraza was doing live sound for us, and Fraza's in the studio with us doing a live, a running DAT while we're writing. Dude, that guy's a hero to sit there through all that, because I'm listening to the tapes and we're just going for hours and hours and hours, permutating like one tune to try to figure out the form. And I can hear when I get to the multi-tracks on some of that. Robert's got he had taken the tabla faders and he was like sending them to the Eventide and just screwing around with those and having fun, which we didn't even hear at the time. And so for me, really interesting to hear those writing sessions. And I don't think I mean, we did what we had to do to figure out. I mean, some of the pieces are very open and some of them are very super tightly constructed. And the super tightly constructed ones, sometimes I wrote stuff and brought it in, but a lot of times Tony Jabal and Bob and I would play them through and find the arrangement. And man, it is so tedious. It is so tedious. And I don't even know. I mean, nowadays I wouldn't do that at all. Now, like when I listen to us go through the let's do it this way. Okay, let's bring in the counterpoint here and change the key here. Nowadays, I can like hear right away, oh, that's a bad idea. I can just hear exactly what to do. But back then we had to play it and fucking play it and 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 play it. And then we end up with, the version. And I don't even know, like this one particular tune, which ended up becoming Gate of Dreams. I don't even know if it's that great of a tune after all those hours and hours and hours and hours of work. But we did what we had to do. So that was pretty interesting. I have demos for a lot of those tunes going way back before, for a couple of tunes, the title tune and Rune Song, which for me are kind of, they were just pinnacle great pieces that we played live really, really well. And Arrakis earlier, but I have demos, ADAT demos going way back where it's just raw shit,
So this writing process, could it be that like you guys were trying to go the entirely democratic way of creating somehow, and that's why like, because I remember something similar, that like I'm in a room with people and like I know like that suggestion is not going to work, but out of respect for the opinion of the other person, I then try it, and sometimes I was proven wrong. So
Yeah, there was definitely some of that. Although the knowing what to do with the music is clear from my position here now, not necessarily 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that you're no, you're absolutely right. There was a kind of well, I would never work like that now. I would never work like that now. I would um, yeah, there was this kind of ideal that this kind of group ideal, which was how Crimson worked. It's how I worked always with Robert generally. Um, uh, Not like there was complete there was pretty much support for try any idea. Not the level of support that Pat described that the way John Paul Jones said they had with Zeppelin, where you're on stage and anyone tries anything, everybody will go with them. That never was never quite like that with Crimson, but but in the writing process, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this kind of ideal of a kind of a group writing, um, which I don't know. I haven't done it in long enough, and I'm kind of a little different now, and probably the same for you. Well, you're still doing Stickman thing, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, I don't know. I don't know if you kind of bring your whole self to that the same way if you're left all to your own. You know what I mean? Like if you've got to make a bunch of decisions really quickly, um, it it's trickier and it's trickier in a group. Um, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think it can be quite frustrating. I mean, especially, and I'm just saying this like from my own experience, when there is like a certain vision that one or two people have, right? And you kind of like know that, like the suggestion to add like a background vocalist, right? Like no, that's not what we want, right? Like we never wanted that, and it was kind of clear. But like if ideas like that are being presented in the writing process, like in, then that can really derail a band, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
uh,
it helps to have a vision that everybody can kind of sink into, and I guess that's what we kind of think of as leadership. But now leadership is so embedded with the idea of politics that it's hard to
yeah, yeah,
feel that way. Uh, and I definitely had a bit of a vision for at least some directions with the Joy Molybdenum. And Tony and Bob were up for everything. I mean, when I listen to the tapes, I'm like, damn, Bob is really putting up with a lot here. um, but it was cool, and also part of the process was at the time Bob's studio and using the studio and trying to get things to sound really good in a way that was kind of beyond um, my capacity, but also even my interest to work so hard to get this kind of mic and this kind of tape. And I kind of jump off the boat a little earlier than some people, but uh, yeah. Yeah, and also the aim was to be able to have stuff that you could play live, which was tricky because we did kind of run. It's really easy with overdubbing. At least we only had 24 tracks, but you can easily make stuff that's a challenge to play live. But that was the case with that stuff.
yeah. I mean, yeah, writing material that only has 3 or 4 parts, right? That's what that means, right? It's pretty hard, you know.
Yeah,
As you say, especially if you have the technology available to flesh out arrangements. And like we kind of run into the same problem even with Stickman material.
I bet.
Yeah, but then we've always found a solution. I mean, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to really play the tune the same way
No, and
Live,
that's the
right?
freedom. I think once you go around that loop a few times, you realize I can make an arrangement of anything. So let's just make the record, and then we'll make an arrangement.
And was it also the time of the Smokey Amps and stuff? Was
Absolutely.
that was that session?
Yes, it was. And what do you know about the Smokey Amps?
Well, only a little bit, but yeah, yeah.
The Smokey Amp came from David Bottrell.
Mhm.
When we were recording the Sylvian Fripp record the first day. David had these little, I think at the time they were still literally made in a cigarette packet.
Mhm.
And David liked to use those. He would set them up and mic them.
Mhm.
And then he would like send a guitar through it and it would be like, or backing vocals. So there's a lot of vocals. There's quite a bit of vocals on the Sylvian Fripp record in the background with this little Smokey amp.
Mhm.
So I got a couple of those, and we recorded. I mean, David mixed the record, and actually one of the tracks I was sending ADATs from to Seattle to New York for the mix, and they didn't ever arrive.
Mhm.
So we actually did do a little recording in the mix session because we needed another tune, and then the tapes arrived after I had to leave New York, and they mixed it. But the coup for the Smokey amp is that I found a way to, I don't know how this happened, but I just found a way of just plugging the guitar in directly to the amp. And then this idea of feedback where you bring the amp to the speaker, I just brought the speaker to the guitar.
Mhm.
And so I was able to do this kind of feedback. But the weird thing, and you can see it on, we have a live show of the tune Sawzall recorded at NAMM on YouTube somewhere. And I figured out that actually bringing the amp to the strings wasn't the thing to do. Maybe because our instruments were so massive that actually bringing the amp to the back of the neck in different spots along the neck would bring out different kinds of feedback. So yeah, that's the Smoky world, and it's such a cool thing, and it's kind of a hassle to deal with it, but it's such a cool thing.
Yeah, it's the idea of the prepared instrument,
Yeah.
but using an electric device here.
And I do remember also one of the aims that I had always had for several of my early records, but really this one too, is this like a question or kind of a problem to solve. Underlying all the music was, how do you write instrumental music that's not jazz or classical?
Mhm.
And that was the thing that I was always wrestling with at the time. How do you do that so it's not a jazz head and then solos and felt totally composed, and that was kind of our solution at the time.
Well, from my perspective, I think you did a great job. I think those tunes are like, if anything, I would call them world music.
Mm-hmm.
Funnily enough, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's obviously there are just only a few elements of the of Crimson in there, which I also appreciated a lot back then. That it wasn't just like it wasn't just an extension of Crimson.
Yeah.
And
well, and a lot of that helped. I mean, mindset, but also a lot of that is Bob's contribution. Who we could have done kind of a more fusion-y drum thing, but we were always both kind of on the page, like, how do we bring in this world percussion but have balls with it, and groove. And the way we did that, and on my earlier records that Bob played on too, we would often record the hand percussion first, and then he would work out a drum kit part that would fit with it, which means you would never ever come up with that drum kit part. It sounds ridiculous on its own, and no drummer would want to play it because it's not actually very pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
So Bob would often, I mean, a couple of times we even had take the hi-hat away and like have a pad that he would hit, or even like sometimes a metal music stand, just to break up the drum kit. And there's probably, I bet that has a big contribution to the strength of the recording. His approach there. Yeah.
And it was also really the still sort of like the beginning of you exploring the wah guitar properly, let's say.
Yes.
With the articulations on the instrument that you couldn't do on the stick, and these things.
Being able to really explore soloing without all the limitations of the stick. There was always these variables that you had to deal with, and now you can just you can just get a note that sounds as good as a guitar player. And okay, now what are you going to do?
Yeah, but also the bass parts. I think they had like suddenly there was like this variation in note length. Let's say like really short things. Like the version. I think there's a version of one of the Winds tracks on one of your later albums, right?
Yeah.
And like
it's the very old version I did on the stick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that was the only version I knew at that point. And then hearing it played on the wah guitar, you're playing very like on the frets and very, very staccato, and maybe even, I don't remember. Did you have piezo pickup back then already?
I might have, but I never liked those.
Yeah. But it has more of that quality, like this, like more acoustic, more control, more variation, and that was sort of like really, I think, like in the world of the people who listen to recordings with this instrument, let's say, it had a huge impact. Like it was the first time that the instrument really sounded like a professional instrument somehow. So that really, especially on that, was that the third record you did with the wah guitar?
Yeah.
It was, right?
It was my third solo CD.
Yeah, so it was the second with the wah guitar. Yeah. So it was still pretty. And there's another track, because you said we could also talk about Repercussions, right?
Yeah.
And there's this one, and I don't know the names of the pieces really. Like, were they even on the record? No.
Well, what's funny about the names, I may even have them here. Originally, Bill didn't want any names at all. So the original, there were no names. Yeah. And the only reason we ever put names later was we decided to make the individual tracks available digitally. So we wanted to have names. So we came up with names, and Bill had just some ridiculous names, but yeah.
But there's one track where you're playing a relatively fast bass part that really didn't sound at all like it was tapped, because it had there was so much control, and like the growl, like a growl, almost like a fretless instrument, which I know it wasn't, but it had that kind of quality, and you could kind of even hear that the response of the strings was like they were really, how should I say this? It sounded as if the string tension was higher somehow than before, and you could play these fast things. And I wish I knew the name of the track. It's like with a ridiculous organ solo by Robert, and but anyway, it's
yeah. And I played around with. I felt like I had a lot of struggle in the early days of the stick, getting the if the music is based on the stick, you're fine. But when you go into a world where traditionally there's bass guitar, I found it very challenging. So when I got the wah guitar that had more blossom and bloom in the low end, and I kind of for quite a while I just started rolling off the high end, and kind of taking away what's traditionally experienced of the stick, the zing, and And I even felt like maybe I even went too far sometimes, like I just ended up kind of down there and not present beyond what a very subtle bass guitar would do. And that's fine for, that's fine for some stuff, but yeah. And that record, Repercussions, oh shit, now I don't know. I was going to say it would have been the 8-string, but I bet it wasn't the 8-string. I bet it wasn't.
Mhm.
I don't remember. No.
Mhm. I think like coming back to that bass sound, um, this kind of like rubbery sound that you would get with a touch instrument, like is very pronounced in the baritone register. So like really not on the very low strings, right? So at that time when you were playing more bass parts and like audible bass parts, right? It was interesting that like that baritone register actually then had enough low ends to function as a bass, and kind of like that was sort of eye-opening, right? And in a way that was also the time when I got my 8-string guitar in when was it, 97, I think it was 97, yeah. And so that was sort of like a very, just finally, that was for me, it was the 8-string from then on. I never went back, but just having this option, like there's actually an instrument that has I can play the baritone register, which I mostly did with Europa string choir, but it sounded like a bass.
Yeah,
it sounded like the bass voice, right? And that was just
and I wonder how, it's funny, this came up in a coaching session the other day, because I can't remember why it came up, but I pulled up, there's a guy out here, Skip Fantry, who makes strings, Circle K strings. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They go up to, I have one here he sent me, it's a 256.
Wow.
Yeah, because he makes these ultra sub basses that go up to 40 inches. And I went over to Skip's many years ago, and he had maybe it was a 5-string. It might have been a 4-string. I can't remember. And it was extra long, like 38 inches or 39 inches. And the bass went down to E, B, F sharp. And the thing that was interesting was that the low string didn't sound that great. I mean, it didn't sound that useful to me, but man, the higher register was so unbelievably fat that you would never get that on a regular bass. That I thought, man, I could play this thing and not even touch the 2 low strings. And it's like, you're up here, but it's like, ooh. And so it's a little bit similar what you're talking about, like maybe the scale length and the string tension. And yeah.
And I found like out in later days, so maybe only around 2007 or so, that actually a lot comes from the really the lighter you play, the fatter the note, and the less compressed the note, and that has become sort of like my thing, so that I only have a 105 as the B flat, actually, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's pretty.
Well, you have it as C, I have it as B flat.
I have it as a C. Yeah, I've gone up as high as 126, and I thought I was fine there, and then I worked my way back to 105, and now I really like that.
Yeah, I remember the original gauges that Mark War sent with the instrument. It was 1 to 6, I think it was, or 1 to 5. Yeah. But anyway, let's come back to the albums, right? So, what do you remember about the recording of Repercussions?
I was thinking about it this morning. Actually, a couple of things I was thinking about in relation to, we had no intention of making that record. Bill Rieflin brought Robert and I in to play on his first solo record ever, Birth of a Giant. And basically we came in and played on Bill's tracks on that record. and whatever he had, whatever he, like the list that he had of us, the stuff that he wanted us to play on, and the amount of time that he allotted for it, they didn't correspond at all. Basically, like we were done in a quarter of the time, and he was like, well, okay, play on this thing. And then I was like, well, shit. Do you guys want to just play? So we went out and just improvised, and that's where Repercussions came from. And it wasn't even very long. I mean, I think when I was digitizing the tapes a couple of months ago, maybe 4 or 5 reels of tape. So, and this was on analog. So, you know, an hour and a half for playing. I do feel a little confused because I see in my notes that we had another session at a different time a few months later, and I don't remember that at all. I don't actually remember a lot of playing. It just went by so quick, and we were just, Robert and I had a couple, like we had a few new things that we were doing, new sounds, and we were both running MIDI, and he had just gotten into his vibe synths and his is there saxophone synth on that record? I can't remember. I don't know if he'd gotten into the saxophone sound yet, but the organ sound, and there was you know, we were there was this incredible freedom because Bill was kind of directing us, and when Robert doesn't have his agenda, he's just like, let's just go crazy, you know. You know, when he's not driving the show, he's just like so free and open, and let's just try everything. And that's what happened. And I don't even know what Bill's plan. I mean, we didn't even know what Bill's plan was with the recording. It didn't have anything to do with us at all. We thought he would probably use it on his record. And so it wasn't until a few months later that, you know, I don't know how it was. Bill came, said we should, you know, cut and paste this stuff. And we had done this weird thing, which is it's going to be really interesting when I remix all of this, especially in quad, because what Bill did was he had like a drum loop that he would put on tracks 1 and 2. And then he was recording his drums with just 3 mics. So it was just a stereo pair and a kick drum. And then I was stereo and Robert was stereo. So that's only 7 tracks. So on one piece of tape, we would play like 3 different improvs to the drum loop. And now they're all mushed on top of each other. And so the kind of production process was Bill and I deciding, you know, whose part goes with which performance and that kind of thing, you know. And Robert would do soundscapes for one whole pass and then soloing. So the recording that we ended up with was just kind of this early mix and match of stuff that was whatever you call it, continuously on the tape next to each other, but not and we didn't have any editing tools, so it was we would just mix from the ADATs to a DAT. I think actually on my little Mackie 16 channel was what we did it on. Yeah, and you know what's really interesting that it occurred to me a couple of weeks ago that you might find interesting was that for all practical purposes, actually for all real purposes, that was the beginning of the projects. And this kind of freedom to, we're not talking about tonality or rhythm, or I mean, Bill's even doing stuff where he's slowing up and speeding down, you know. We leave the drum loop behind. There's just this very big freedom. But you know what occurred to me? Actually, the real beginning of the projects was when Robert and I did a session with Brian Eno for the NerveNet record. which I don't remember when that was, but it was before that. I was over in England.
Oh, NerfNet is from 91 or something, right? It's like much earlier.
Could it be that early?
Shall I check it?
Why don't you check it? It's that early. That really freaks me out. But I didn't have the war guitar.
Mm.
No, I was playing the stick. So yeah, check it.
Was released in 92.
Okay. So I was in England. Probably we were doing, I don't know what, Sylvian Fripp stuff or something. I can't remember. And then Robert got a call from Eno, and I don't think he'd done a session with Eno for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he's going to go down for 2 days, and then would I like to join them? I was like, nah, I don't want to play with you guys. I said, sure. So he brought me in the last day, and it was a fascinating day. I was nervous. I was pretty nervous. Singleton was there, and Eno was there, and Robert, and then Eno's engineer. I can't remember his name. Great engineer though. And I think it was his private studio or something. I can't remember. It wasn't a big studio, and we played on all sorts of stuff. He just brought up stuff, and he was really the first time I got like what a producer can do for the vibe. Like he was so enthusiastic, and it was so contagious that you just wanted to play. You just wanted to play, and it was the opposite of so many other sessions I've done where you're like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Let's just, oh, that's so great. And he was so enthusiastic about his stuff. And okay, well, we did that. Okay, now let's bring this other tape up and do this and that. And the very, very end of the day, maybe it was even 2 days. I can't remember now, but like the last few hours of the session, had kind of run out of his stuff that he was throwing at us, and now he was just throwing drum beats at us. And for a lot of it, Robert and I were recording at the same time, so we were playing together to these drum loops and with no direction at all. Just like, I got this tune. Okay, you guys go. And there was this moment where I don't know what Robert was doing. I can read the guitar. I can read the fretboard quite good on his tuning and regular tuning, but I couldn't see him, and I wasn't sure what I was doing. And there was this. I had this sense of like, I can play any note I want, and I'm going to, and just make something cool that's groovy, and it can be just like burp, 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 pop, pop. And then Robert played this little soundscape thing, and then Eno asked him to do a solo over it. And so Robert went into the studio. Sometimes we were in the control room. So anyway, he went into the studio, and Eno stood in the control room and was conducting it. And his conducting was like, and that's all he did. And Robert played. He played a solo like I'd never ever heard him play ever before. It was completely unlike the vocabulary that I'd ever heard him do. It was like ridiculously chromatic, and I don't know. I have this memory of him really following Eno's gestures. I don't know how much he was really tracking them or not, but he basically, in that moment, just kind of opened up this whole vocabulary, which went on to become these really chromatic soloing lines that you heard in the Crimson and Thrack and Power to Believe, and what was all over the project stuff. So for me, now that I think about it, that's really where that moment of like, let's open, like this little door peeked open. We couldn't really get back to it for many years, but
I have not been there, but
and Eno left that track off the record.
He did. But there's one solo like that.
He did release it eventually.
Anyway, like I think on the record there's a track called Distributed Being, which has one solo that is the way that you describe like a frip solo. And I kind of agree, you know, like for me, there's even like the arc is even, funnily enough, with Sunday All Over the World. I think for me, the solos that Robert is playing on that album, they are sort of like unique in his way of soloing, just the sound even, and the note choice and stuff, and like bendings in ways that he's not really done, I think. And then like maybe just a couple years later was this Eno session, right? And so then comes King Crimson, well, Sylvian Fripp, and there is like some of that like firepower, you know, live, where Robert starts doing also like some tapping with the right hand, and you got these really these big intervals, you know, in the solos and stuff. And then with Crimson, it kind of like it goes back a little bit into like more of an old-fashioned way. But then with Thrack Attack, things kind of like go into the complete open field. Then with David Singleton compiling, because I spoke to David Singleton actually a couple of weeks ago, and he explained to me the process of creating a Thrack Attack, right? So we took like 3-minute improvs and he, you know, he turned them into 10-minute pieces, or originally in a 60-minute piece, and then you guys on the next tour, he said, then you guys played longer improvs in the middle of Thrack, right? And then there is, you know, and this is, you know, because I do not know the timeline here. Then there's the Nashville rehearsals in '97, that the very last 6-piece Crimson sessions or rehearsals that you guys had, right? And Repercussions, where does that fit in? Was that after Nashville? Before? Because I have another observation there.
Well, I can tell you exactly, because I have the tape right here. There's some edits from August '98 and rough mixes in November of '97. 5/13/97.
Okay.
May 97 was when we did the first recordings.
Okay, so I would have to find out what the dates were for the Nashville sessions.
I feel like it. If that's the case,
you know, let me tell you what I think.
After, or if it was before, then Robert was already wondering if we should even be doing the 6-piece Crimson.
Yes, because on the Repercussions album, there is none, or maybe just very little of the repertoire, motif repertoire that you guys used in the projects. Yeah. But on the Nashville rehearsals, those are there.
Oh, interesting.
And that's why I'm thinking that maybe the Repercussion session was probably before, and that would explain it. But that also means that like this whole story is really like this, right? It's
conflict,
it's conflict and interlocked also, just in terms of how the material kind of like and the ideas were generated. Yeah, fascinating, man. You're right. I would think if we're right about that timeline, if I were Robert, I would feel very, very constrained in the 6-piece Crimson after doing Repercussions. Yes. I mean, you know, we're flexible. We do this for a while, and we know it's gonna, you know, but still, there's, you know, you can't do. I don't want to say you can't do that kind of improvising with 6 people, but it would be even more special than 3 people doing it. You would have to have just a higher level of restraint, and I think from my perspective, listening or just remembering that music, like the Nashville rehearsals, it sounded to me like there wasn't even an attempt made at improvisation, really. It sort of sounds to me like it was like the beginnings of writing based on these absurd musical motifs, right? and then I can see, like, with 6 people, like, how can you really write democratically with these puzzle pieces that need to be carefully placed and thought out, and then basically what you guys did as a 4-piece for Construction of Light and Power to Believe was that work then, like, writing from those elements, right?
Yeah. And I would never, well, I don't want to say I would never, but I would not choose to put myself in that situation with 2 drummers in the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I would think you would have to, I don't know what, separate the elements to, uh, uh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tricky kind of thing, that kind of writing, and that's what's so great about the improvs. They're super challenging to listen to. They're not structured, and the architecture is evolving as it goes, but it's immediate, right? It either works or it doesn't. You don't have to spend 9 months crafting little bricks together to end up with something. You just play and.
Hey, so with the Trey Gunn band, was improv part of that, and to which extent?
Yes, but not like this. Not like this. It was more. We had a kind of vocabulary of cueing that I really, really liked. That really worked for me. For me, the free improv is great, but it only works with the right combinations of right players, and it doesn't work all the time. So for me, that in a performance, kind of that spectrum of composition and improvisation is the variation of that is for me the most valuable or the most rewarding. So we would have solos. Obviously, we would have one of the things that I discovered, at least for myself, certainly nothing that I invented, was a kind of a kind of a structure where I would start a solo, and I'm thinking about 1 or 2 pieces in particular. I would start the solo in a certain key, and then I could hang there as long as I wanted, and then I would cue the guys for the next chord change, which then set up a sequence of chords.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there was this room to kind of really play the vibe in the moment and just hang on it. Not exactly like a meditation, but maybe like hang there as long as you wanted. In a lot of music, that's where it ends. But then we would have this kind of wrap up out with chord changes where the solo would go around the chord, and then there would be whatever kind of head we had or ending. And for me, that's kind of ideal, that you've got it's a little bit like a safety net, but it's also just kind of wrapping up the freedom in a form. A lot of the pieces were very tight, like the Joy of Molybdenum. That tune was very tight. Rune Song, very tight. The solos were fixed form. The most free piece we had was a Rakas, which also had a similar kind of cued form that would often go off course, which was super exciting. The piece was basically this groove that in the live shows, Joe Mendelson played the 8-string second or guitar, and Bob, they would do this kind of abstracty groove. And basically we thought of it as it's in the time signature of 1/4. And then there was, what was cool was we had we had these musical structures that we could cue, and they went in a specific order. So there were chord hits in the beginning that had certain distances between them, and I would cue those, and then Bob, Tony, and everybody would hit those. We also did that at the end. And then there were these little kind of abstracty symmetrically chromatic lines that were kind of, for me, kind of like, I thought of them as like African guitar parts that Tony and I would play in unison or in harmony. And there were, they always came in the certain order, and I would just cue them whenever I felt like it. So I would actually count off to Tony each one of them, and there'd be like 3 and then a chord hit and then 2 and a chord hit and then a bunch of solos, and then we'd do it again differently. And it was always, that piece was always exciting. There's no question about it, and it was exciting because sometimes Bob would play it slower. Sometimes he'd play it so fast that Tony and I were just like, we could barely hold on. And sometimes I would count off the cues and nobody would quite get where the one was, and we'd all come in, and then it'd be like this weird spider web. So there was that kind of stuff. And for me, that worked with this group of guys, and yeah.
Do you remember which year it was that you guys started playing live shows?
I think 97, 98, up through 2002, I think. Yeah.
So about a 5-year stretch.
Yeah. And it was hard to put, it was hard to take a band on the road. There was always, are we going to get enough shows on the West Coast, and where are we going to stay? There's no tour manager and sound man, and eventually no agent. And then Fraza started booking gigs for us. But we did get to go, we did go down to Mexico, and we got to do a lot of different shows at different levels. Yeah.
Did you play outside of America?
Just Mexico, I believe, is the only thing. Yeah, it wasn't possible to get to Europe. Yeah. Bob had so much shit. And I wasn't even, because he had all of his tablas, and even like when we went to Mexico, because of the way I described how we made the recordings, like we'd lay down tablas, and what Bob and I had figured out was, like, if he had the high tabla in a C sharp and a D, we could do a lot of different keys. So we had to have both those, and we'd figure out which one would work. If it didn't work, I'd change the key or something. But the tablas, and then the band, the other Egyptian and Irish and Turkish percussion in with the kit, and what he had to figure out to do, which is an amazing feat, and you can see it in some of the YouTube videos that we recorded at his studio. He figured out a way to put the tabla on snare drum stands and have them right here, so he could just turn his stool and tabla, and he'd maybe have a Dombek on his, on him, and then stick. So you see him doing, intro on the tabla, and the tabla weren't nice little percussion things. They were, the low drum sounded as big as a kick drum, and then he would pick up the sticks and do all that. So when it took so much hardware to pull that off. Like when we went to Mexico, he had to have, just the right kind of stands, and they had to, work. So it wasn't a very a good traveling situation. We had to borrow a lot of shit.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, my generation of professional musician, I would actually build the band around the idea of being able to travel.
Exactly. You would now, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
And even still, we're trying to get smaller and smaller. Like, I think I can get even smaller now.
Yeah. I have like a very, very small solution now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we already talked about what happened with Crimson around the time, and
it was kind of actually when the Trey Gunn band kind of the energy for it just kind of just went out almost at the same time period, like 2002.
Yeah.
I suddenly it just felt so old fashioned to be in a rock band. It felt actually it felt archaic. Like why why be doing that? That doesn't make any sense at all.
Hey, was there anything in the air at that time, culturally, or thinking out loud here, maybe it was even 9/11 or something?
Oh,
Was there anything up in the air culturally which may have triggered this, even like
uh,
in like the kind of music that was popular or something even?
I I don't have the perspective to say that. I don't really know. I'd have to look at it, or somebody else would have to compare. I mean, for me, it was. I mean, basically, I turned 42 right then too,
Yeah, yeah.
and so that kind of was the end of that whole period was kind of the end of well, at least looking forward from in the 20s, that was kind of the end of my life. I didn't see past 2000, literally. I didn't
Yeah,
see past
yeah.
2000. So I think it was probably for me just very personal. Like I've been doing this for 20 years, and why would I keep doing it? And Crimson is gone, and why would I keep trying to do that? And what kind of happened was I struck up a really strong artistic friendship relationship with Joe Mendelson, the second war guitarist, and we were playing around with video in with the Trey Gunn band, and also playing around with. I don't remember how we did it, but I know we were starting to play around with what does it mean when you have text on the screen with the music. And so we did a couple of little experiments, and like once I did that, I was like, I'm not being why be in a rock band? That doesn't make any sense. You know what you're getting. Okay, there's good and there's bad, but you know it. And that's kind of how this Quodia project began. That once Joe and I kind of stepped off the edge into that, I just couldn't do the rock band thing at all. It just didn't make any sense to carry your gear around the world and make a giant, big, loud noise. Um, and so maybe we talk about that for a little bit, just because. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the way the Quodia project began pretty much was I wrote a very short little text, and I was kind of nervous to bring it to Joe because I don't know, but he was open, and in the course of one weekend, we just very quickly made what ended up being the opening 8 minutes of our first piece, and we did it in Joe's tiny little studio in Hell's Kitchen in New York, and it was. I was playing very much that percussive stick kind of style of playing with the war guitar, and narrating this story, narrating this thing. I'll talk about that in a second. And Joe recorded me saying it and playing while he played this keyboard pad that was moving around the tonality. And that was our first. We just did a pass of it and was like, shit, that's fucking crazy. And we liked it. And actually, one of the things that was interesting that we spent pretty much the duration of the project trying to chase that sound, to figure out how to do it live, was that my vocal mic was picking up the actual tapping of the instrument. And so it gave this really extremely percussive, like a kalimba kind of sound, where the DI'd sound was kind of the roundness around basically this tapping. And man, I spent like 5 years trying to figure out how to do that, get that live. And so that was the Quodia. And then he came out to Seattle, and we added the visual element, which was some words and some imagery. And the project just kind of was born from that. And it was super amazing because we were both into what I kind of look at as like this, I don't know what you call it, but this axis of the art, which is there's there's like language, visual, and audio. And in the audio, like on the audio axis, there's kind of music on one end and sound design on the other end. And then with the visual, you have like very specific kind of iconic imagery over to, you know, abstract. And then language, there's the, I can't remember how we thought of it, but like there's like clear text and then actually the symbols of the letters. And so we kind of had this thing where we were playing all these elements, and we came up with a kind of a vision where you don't have all the elements happening all at the same time. And what we ended up with doing with this piece that became the Arrow, which was the piece that we performed, the screen was just completely black for 3 minutes, and there was nothing there. And I would be narrating this story along with the music, and then eventually a piece of a word from what I was saying would pop up on the screen and mutate. And Joe and I were just completely in sync for this whole project, where we did not like it when the imagery was super clear. Like you could say, oh, that's a woman's face, or we came up with a version where like, this is too on the nose, this is too abstract, or the music's being very specific and the language is being specific. So let's use something abstract. And we found a way to just kind of balance all these elements into a whole thing. And I can just go on and on about this unless you have a question.
No, I want you to go on.
Okay. So we knew we were making something really amazing. And actually my friend, John Hendow, who I'm still in touch with, was working at the Experience in Music project here in town. And he let us go in, and he arranged for us to go in and film a demo of the opening of the piece at the Sky Church, which has this insane video display. And when we went into, and I can talk about the text a little bit more in a second, but when we went into, maybe I should at first, the way that the text was a story, basically, but it was basically a kind of guided meditation. What I discovered when I would play it for people, the text was very clearly a story. I mean, the beginning of it is about a woman and a boy, and a mythological, archetypal story. And it was vague enough that every time I played it for someone, they made their own story out of it. And that's when I thought, okay, we got something going on here. At least for the moment, fuck rock and roll. There's something amazing is going on here, that there's this skeleton of a scaffolding that people are like pouring their own psychology into, basically, and perhaps even part of their spiritual life. I couldn't say, but so when we first performed it at the Sky Church, there was no audience, but there were people going on their way to the museum, and I noticed a couple of people like frozen watching us, and I had, for me, pretty powerful experience of saying the words, and they're not, they're inside other people, and it's their story. It's not even, doesn't have anything to do with me at all. And we had this experience time and time again. Generally, the response to the performances early on were, I was going to say 70% negative. It's probably more like 40% negative, because we came here to see a King Crimson guitar player wheedle on us, and it was kind of billed as that. And then the other 60% was there was like 55% of like, huh? And then there was like 3 to 5% people who had, kind of a life experience, and you could see they would come up to us and they Joe would be like, you got to go talk to this person. She's like, this is about my son and this and that. And then somebody else would have, oh, this is my grandmother when she was living in South America in the desert. And somebody else is like, oh, this is this. And this is my mother. And I was like, wow, there's something wild going on here. And so we kind of barreled forward with this thing. And our first shows we played some really cool shows. We played some shows in Italy, didn't work. We played some shows in Norway, didn't really work. And what we found was that because the language was English, even though the language was really simple, it was very much a kind of dream description, but very simple. There's a horse, there's dark eyebrows, there's a hand, there's a rabbit, very, for us, really concrete English speakers. But when English isn't your first language and you come across this, you just have this feeling that you don't understand what's going on at all. Mm-hmm. And so Joe and I kind of really dug in to tackle this problem. And what we ended up doing was bringing in other languages. So we would have, there were themes, light, dark, power, and we would have the theme, I would be telling a story and I would just say the word light, and the word light would come up on the screen in English, and then it would drift down and then off the screen. And as it drifted down, it would go through Finnish, German, Hungarian, Hebrew. And so that's what we started playing around with. And then we took it even a step further when we went to Russia the first time, and it was great. So the Russians are so brutal. Sasha was like, it was pretty good except for all that boring part. Who was our promoter, and then other Russians are like, why are you doing this? This is shit. You should be playing more solos. And we realized it didn't work. And so the next time we went to Russia, we were also on our way to South America. We took one of the stories. Joe was friends with and had produced Regina Spektor's first two records, who Regina's a superstar now, but he got her to read one of the stories. That was one of the other things that we wanted to do, is break up so that I'm not always narrating. So her brother read a little part. We got a guy, Gino, here in town from former Yugoslavia to read a part. And then Regina read a part, and we actually filmed her lips. And so you hear her tell this over the top strange story called The Water Woman. And then eventually her giant lips appear on the screen and she finishes the story. Well, we got her to do a Russian translation and do it in Russian. And that was fascinating because she had her father on the phone. She was like, okay, there's these 6 birds. How do we do this? How do I translate this? There's all these different ways to do it. So she had her father on the phone, and then we were talking with Sasha, who was bringing us to Europe. And he was very concerned that if we had a Russian voice in our show, that if it was the wrong kind of Russian voice, it would totally throw off all the people in Moscow. Kind of like as if you had somebody from Alabama reading the wrong thing in New York City, Mm-hmm. So we had this whole big discussion. Anyway, Regina did that, and then I had a friend here do a version in Spanish. So we actually had, when we went to Russia, we had Regina's the Russian version of Water Woman, and then we were in the Spanish-speaking countries, we had it in Spanish, and it was fascinating. People hated that in Russia, that we did it in Russian. Mm-hmm. Because they thought, what, you don't think we can speak English? Mm-hmm. Whereas in South America, they thought we were being so generous to, So Joe and I, basically, we had this really interesting thing, and we had to figure out a way to make as many doorways into the piece as possible, because everybody's so different in different languages. And that's kind of the story. It was fascinating to perform the thing because it was just the two of us. So no drums. Joe mixed us on stage. We'd bring our own projector and our own screen. which is a whole other story about it. And what was really fascinating was that the video was fixed in time. So we had a 1 hour and 7 minute QuickTime file with some sound design built into it. So there was water and fire and Regina's voice and other voices. But the music that Joe and I played was never, there was no click track or anything. We would play it freely along with the piece, and then along with the video, and then I would do the narration, which wasn't necessarily fixed with the music as well. So for myself, it was a crazy experience of playing, and I could change the tempo. Sometimes the opening piece would be slow, sometimes it would be faster, and I could play the piece as free as I wanted, and I could do the lyrics as long as the text, as long as it came up close with the words on the screen. So it was this really strange splitting myself into pieces that as much as the kind of crazy polyrhythmic stuff and free stuff we've done, this is a very, very different experience. The piece, the project kind of crashed and burned. It wasn't, we were too early for doing this kind of piece. You know, there wasn't performance spaces at the time with video screens and video projectors. We were having to adapt to going into kind of a rock and roll setting where you actually need to sit quietly and experience a theater piece. And, you know, there was often a bar going on at the same time, or we'd be in a theater and our projector wasn't strong enough and wasn't big enough, and the screen wasn't big enough. And the project just kind of burned out. And, you know, add 8 or 10 years to that, now there's this kind of thing is going on, and there are spaces for it. So it's like, in a way, it was kind of the pinnacle of like being able to bring everything that I have and put it in the context that really works for me. You know, not just a musical context, but all these other elements. And so it's kind of like crushingly disappointing as well as amazing to have been able to do.
Yeah, I certainly understand. Just like, you know, I was there following you. Like, I never saw a performance of it, but like, and just my impression back then and now, like from your description, it was sort of like a very, very spiritual or a way of spiritual research, I would call it.
Yeah.
And I mean not just for you, but I mean, like, it was like a space that you kind of like offered, right?
Yeah.
For that. Yeah. And this idea to have like these elements like at the same, well, sometimes at the same time, but they don't have to be in sync, right?
No, it was more echo.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of like very much in a way a little bit like almost like 19th century kind of psychology, Freud, you know, kind of vibe, you know, like and I can see that it must have been like really difficult for people to say, oh wow, this is cool, or even and this is the thing, even if people think it's cool and they actually get touched by this in such a way that they realize, I can't do this, like I would get like really strong reactions, and then
no, you're absolutely right. There was, you know, the last we had done what we thought was our last show, and then Alonso brought us down. I think we've done to Mexico 3 times. The last gig we played was like after a year break. We went down and played this international poetry festival outside in Mexico City. That was amazing. And it was such a cultural, that the everywhere we did it, it was such a different cultural experience because of how people relate to their own psychology personally, but also as a culture, and then how they relate to language in general, and performance, and how open they were. And that was a super open performance. And we know there were people there who didn't even speak English that well, but I think because we were in a poetry festival, we kind of all of our elements were that people normally would have come to hear the music. I mean, there's some really cool music, don't get me wrong, but that was a bonus in the poetry festival. But yeah, the psychological aspect of, basically we were kind of working with these archetypes in an open enough a way that you weren't, the characters were open. So it really was, when I say guided meditation, I'm not joking, because what I found, that in order to, one, memorize the text and be able to not get lost, but also so that the feeling was working in the performance, I had to visualize the story. And if I lost the visualization, you could feel the room, the energy just would kind of disappear. And then I might even get lost in the text. But so that was my first aim, was like, I have to visualize my version of the story tonight. And then everything's going to fall in place. And everybody would kind of, I don't know, there's a different kind of energy that everybody kind of rode in on that. So super cool project. I could easily drop everything and just be doing that, to be honest. But it's so daunting. It was so daunting. We were using Final Cut 4 at the time, and trying to just figure out, like, sometimes it would take 6 hours to do a render to see that the visuals we had just made actually were shit and didn't work. It took forever. So very, very daunting. Yeah.
And you sort of like putting yourself into a position to play, to recite, to breathe, right? Using your voice with that, making or conjuring up the story, the imagery, so that you could deliver the story with your voice. I think also that is probably, well, I don't know, must have been like one of the most, on the level of like a practicing musician, right? Like one of the high points really of your career as well, right? Just this idea of,
yeah, it was whole as holistic as it gets.
Yeah. Incredible. And you know what? I just had this funny idea that the performance we did at CPROC, even though it was nothing like Quodia and it didn't have the screen, but now that I kind of like listen back to the music that we played, there's something of that Quodia quality, that sort of introspective, emotionally challenging, archetypal kind of like stuff.
Yeah, well, I think for me, it may have started when we started playing with the sound design. Remember, like, we started with the birds, and
yes,
then
we
had the little bicycle sounds in the middle, and then that's like, it's funny for me when and it's funny to say this because of how much music I've made and how much more music I will make, but when it's just music alone, when the music is serving something else, there's like another container that the music kind of, or when the music isn't just the only thing, it's like becomes something bigger. It becomes, and we did kind of just that simple thing of having the natural sound design at the beginning and the end. It opens it into a different door where it's not just guys playing their instruments, right? When you,
I totally agree.
And then remember when the sound kind of dropped out really quietly, and then you heard the little bicycle mechanical thing. Is like, oh wow, it's not just playing with sound. It's like I don't know, you're bringing in a whole other, like, I think like a whole other axis of the dimension it's like going from 3D to 4D.
Yeah, totally. And the funny thing is that I had that track on a fader. Like I did. So I could control that, and I put delays and reverb on it. I was playing with that as well.
Right.
But I totally agree with that. Really set the mood, and also the fact that we allowed, I think it was maybe like, the guy who announced us, and then I had asked him to push the space bar to start the track, start the crickets, right? And so then we had the crickets going for like 5 minutes until
I know we were no rush to begin. That's
and
awesome.
yeah.
Yes, there's something cool there. And actually, I it's funny to talk about this in this context, but I'm really curious to see what our next thing is like, almost precisely because of the cover art that Julia gave us.
Mm-hmm.
Because that adds like I feel like I could run with that in some kind of way.
Yeah, and it also, for me, the cover art, and I mean this in a very positive way. It just doesn't kind of like pick up from the visual of the show. It's like something very different. It's sort of like more like the music without a visual, and then and
it's really tricky with the whole visual thing. And I know we're just talking about the cover art, but the thing that Joe and I wrestled a lot with, that when you see a Tool show or a Steven Wilson show, the visuals are doing something completely different than what we were trying to do. And in fact, they're having the opposite effect of what we were trying to do with Quodia, where they're like a film. They're filling you up with themselves. And one of my friends even thought that the visual element in the Tool show was actually fascism. That's a little extreme for me, but I get it. Like what we were trying to do was be suggestive to get basically you couldn't experience the Quodia show without activating your own creative insides. And of course, a lot of people don't know how to do that. Some people, like you say, don't want to do it because you're opening up a gate that dark shit is going to come in as well. And there's some really dark stuff in the Quodia show, stuff where people were like, didn't like it at all. And so it's really tricky with because we're such a visual culture. We see TV and amazing visuals, and all of those things they're generally filling you up as opposed to enticing what's in you out to the front. Enticing what's deeper to the outside, I guess.
I have been into hypnotherapy for a long time. Like that's one of the things that I learned and do, right? And it's about leaving the blanks. It's you don't finish the sentence. And then like the listener, the viewer kind of starts filling in these words, and I remember even that you guys had like blur text. Is that possible? Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, we didn't have. There weren't very many visual effects available to us at the time, so that was one of the things that we would do. We wanted the words to kind of. It's fascinating when you first of all, it's really fascinating when you read a word compared to when you hear it. And when it's both happening at the same time, and let's say you throw the word power up there, but the text keeps going, the verbal text keeps going, but the word power stays up there, and it starts to blur into another word like notice over the top of the music and the text. It just makes this if you're really in it, it makes this weird stretching thing where your brain kind of gets overloaded with it. And so we did a lot of blurring because that was kind of one of the things that we could do. And also blurring one word into another word, like which word and which word in the text that I'm speaking are we going to grab on? Sometimes it would be a mundane word, and sometimes it would be, but you leave a mundane word up there long enough, and the vocal text keeps going, it starts to take on other meaning too, depending on, and like I say, a lot of it was trying to make openings so that there would be an opening somewhere for every different kind of person and culture. That was the idea.
Yeah, great idea. Wonderful. And so but you said that looking back, you feel a little bit of disappointment still.
Well, we didn't ever get we didn't get a yes from the world at large in order to keep doing it. We got yes from specific people who had experiences in the show, and big yeses, like bigger yeses than I would say a lot of my musical life got. But we didn't get enough yeses from the world to keep it going, and I didn't have the energy to blast on. Yeah.
So are you still in touch with Joe?
Yeah. Well, he I think it I think it may have completely burned him out as well, because he did all the mixing and it took like a year. It took a year to mix the project, and especially in the 5.1, and he sorted out his own way to do surround sound. And he was running a TV and film mixing studio in New York and sold that. And I think he's been living in Mexico a lot. I don't know. I think he may still be there.
You know what? we talked about 90 minutes already. So. and like we're like this is kind of like the point where it gets interesting now after Quodia for me.
Awesome. Well, that's going to be a good conversation.
Around that time, was there anything else?
I don't think so. I can't really remember. Yeah, I think I was pretty. Yeah, there must not have been stuff. Well, there's I don't know when the UKZ thing happened, but I didn't really want to do bands anymore, and I didn't want to go on the road. I didn't want to do. I didn't want to do what you guys were doing in Stickman. I just couldn't do that. That's what you had to do. That's what you had to do if you're going to have any success. You just needed to hit clubs over and over and over once or twice a year, and I just couldn't do that anymore.
But you played a few shows with Pat, and you also went to Russia with Pat, right? And and KTU, which turned into K2. Well, yeah. That was also around that time.
Yeah, you're right.
I remember like the very first show that you played that was still as a 4-piece, obviously, in Helsinki. I was there actually. I was opening for you guys. You may not even remember.
I don't remember that. Just by yourself, or
no, with a Finnish guy.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Petri. Yeah,
it's funny. I remember from that show too. Sasha brought us, and he also said the same thing. It's a bit boring.
Yeah,
I mean, he got it. Then he got it later.
Yeah, Sasha is kind of like, he's not really about the art. He's about the pleasing the audience, and that's understandable, right?
Yeah,
from his perspective.
Well, he kept bringing us, so yeah.
So amazing. Like, so that was, like you say, 42, 43, 44 maybe, and the next 16 years or more, we can start talking about next time. If you
Yeah.
still want to do another.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's finish. Let's try to get to the end.
Yeah, well, not the end, but yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? This age 42, right?
Yeah, it
and
is.
and how this idea of 7 years and the octave and stuff like that really actually seems to play out.
Yeah, it really does. It does. You know what's even stranger, I think, or maybe it changes even more when you get older. That uh, I felt like these 7 year periods from 42 backwards, they kind of just like clunked in, like 41, then bam, 42. And now it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like it starts several years earlier. And there's this kind of weird, like this feeling like you're in a solid zone, like 50s, my 50s, I just felt like I was in a solid zone, like 56, right? That's one. And you're like solid there. And then everything's great. And then it just starts to get all whooshy for a few years. And now, and that's not that kind of mindset from that time period is kind of going away, but the new one isn't in yet. And so there's like the 63 now is pulling me, and it feels like it's going to be good when I get there, but like in between, it's really very uncomfortable. It didn't used to be like that for me. It used to be just like, you know what I mean? Like you're just going with this 30 cents and then like, bam, 42, all new.
I know exactly what you mean, but it starts to blur much more.
Yeah. Yeah.
But still you can see the you could say it's either like the summit or the valley, right? That you get to at these points, and yeah, I wonder if it's really just about actually having a sense for it,
Could be awareness. It could be awareness. And like you have because you've been around that little circle so many times, you start to like, oh, we're 3 o'clock now. Now it's 5:30. I know 5:30. That's like, okay, that means midnight's going to come eventually.
I'm going to be at 7x7 this year.
Ah.
So it's interesting. And I'm actually running a course right now, which is 49 weeks long.
Wow.
I don't know if I told you, but it's kind of, it's a touch guitar course, right? For 49 weeks. It's an experiment. And like the idea is that, as we know, people drop out, right? Out of these, like when you do your ear training course, a modes course.
Longer one, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking, okay, let's do a long course so that people can actually return. It's sort of like the idea.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember 49 specifically, but I do remember 50s was great. 50s was where I was like, when I turned 50, I was like, you know what? I'm going to work as little as possible now. In the good way, like if I can do this thing with as little effort as possible, that's how I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do 3 times effort for one particle of effect. If I can do a half a joule of energy, that's the way to do it now. And I really try to do that everywhere. Yeah.
That's so funny because when I had the like the burnout at 42, which really was sort of like a burnout, my friend Eric, who the Viking Eric, like he said something to me where he said, Marcus, you only need to do like 5% of what you want to do, and you will still be doing 100%.
That's great. That's wisdom. Viking wisdom.
Yeah.
The thing is, you just have to learn which is the 5%. That's the thing. Otherwise life would have been totally different, But if you do the wrong 5%, then.
Okay, cool. So shall we meet again next week, same time?
We can't, because we're meeting with Barry.
Oh yeah, we are. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so then maybe the week after. Yeah. Okay, man.
Yeah. All right, cool. Nice one.
Nice one. Take care.
All
See you
right. Have a
soon.
good
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. Bye bye. Cheers.